I often get asked what books I recommend to people who want to hone their scientific and medical writing skills. In this video, I'm going to share some of my key takeaways from one of my top book recommendations, Writing Science by Joshua Schimel. And if we haven't met, hello, my name is Crystal Heron. I'm a trained biomedical scientist turned clinical researcher and now scientific and medical editor. And since 2011, I've helped scientists, clinicians, and medical communicators write with intention, clarity, and confidence. Now, the subtitle of this book, Writing Science, is How to Write Papers That Get Cited and Proposals That Get Funded. But if you are not writing papers and proposals, don't be deterred. This book contains many principles that will apply to everything that you write. So even if you're not writing papers and proposals, I highly recommend this book. And in case you want to check it out, I will include a link in the description box. So this book was recommended to me when I was first starting out as a scientific editor. And in this video, I'm going to share the 3 things that stood out to me the most then and still stick with me more than a decade later. So the first thing that really stood out to me in this book, and I will say that I am speaking mostly to researchers here. And if you're a researcher, you may not believe me when you hear me say this, but hear me out. But you are a professional writer. And actually, this book opens the very first chapter with the quote, "As a scientist, you are a professional writer." And Schimel goes on to explain what he means by this, but it really struck me because most scientists, including myself at the time, think of themselves as researchers. They focus on the research and they think that the writing is really just to get funding to support that research and to publish that research. But if you take a moment to really think about it, that as you move through your career, you start off in the lab doing experiments, and then over time you transition to in your office, to sitting at your desk and writing. And so you spend a lot less time actually doing the research and a lot more time doing the writing to support that research. And so really, you become a professional writer. And your organization depends on you getting funding and publishing, which means that you need to write proposals and papers to support your work and support the organization. Now, what's interesting about this is that although these organizations depend on you, they don't offer adequate training or support with learning how to write well. And that's a whole separate conversation, but that is something that I would love to see tackled and addressed at more organizations. But what I really want to highlight is that your career depends on your ability to write well. So this book made me more fully recognize that scientists are professional writers. And I think that the more that scientists and organizations recognize that they are professional writers, I think that they can get more support to be able to write well. Now, the second thing that stood out to me in this book is story structure. So before reading this book, I hadn't even considered that writing about science is storytelling. And this is something that I hear from a lot of scientists and clinicians, that writing about science is not storytelling unless maybe you're writing for the public. But scientific writing, manuscripts, proposals, they are about storytelling. And this book has some really great frameworks for storytelling in your writing. And I will admit that I don't agree with all of the frameworks that he described, but this book inspired me to think deeply about storytelling and frameworks of storytelling and to develop my own frameworks. And one of those frameworks is my story structure framework for research manuscripts. I call it the stacker structure. And I talked about this in a previous video. I will add a link to it in the description box for you. And I've developed a whole bunch of other frameworks that I teach in my Scientific Writing Simplified course, and I'll add a link to the description box in case you want to check that out as well. So the third thing that really stood out to me in this book is flow. So before reading this book, I thought that scientific and medical writing were supposed to be choppy and disjointed, that it was academic style. But I have since learned that this is just bad writing, and this book was part of that. So this book has a chapter dedicated to flow, and it talks about how to connect sentences and paragraphs seamlessly. And it addresses one of the biggest problems that I see in scientific and medical writing for the reasons that I described before. And so this chapter also inspired my own ideas and my own frameworks for flow that I teach in my Scientific Writing Simplified course and other trainings. And in case you're wondering, I get a lot of questions about flow, especially when I teach it. And a common question that I get is, well, can AI help with that? And actually, it can't. So AI, or large language models, are really what I'm talking about here. These are probability models, and they work by predicting the next word based on a certain set of factors. And so because it's always looking at the next word, it can't make the connections for flow, which really require looking back at everything that's been written already. So this book is a great starting point on flow and how you can bring flow to your writing. So those are just 3 things that stood out to me in this book, and they have greatly influenced my writing and my work and my own ideas. So I highly, highly recommend this book. And if you've read this book, I'd love to know what your key takeaways were, and I hope that you'll share them in the comments below. And if you have another book that you'd recommend, I hope that you'll share them in the comments as well, so that we can all continue to hone our writing skills. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in the next video.